Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Wise Decision Maker. Now, making wise decisions is half the battle. The other half of the battle is implementing these decisions. Because if you make a wise decision, but you fall down in implementing it, you're not really going to get what you're going for, right? We'll talk today about a strategy that you can use to implement your decisions in the most effective manner possible. It's especially effective for major projects and critical processes. The strategy is called failure proofing, and boy, do I wish I knew about it earlier in my life. Now, I'm almost embarrassed to admit it now, but I used to be the kind of person who, when I made a decision, I used to just charge ahead, not really thinking about it thoroughly, not thinking about implementing it, it's just go, go, go. I made a decision, let's go and implement it. So I remember a time, again, pretty early on in my relationship with my wife and business partner, Agnes Vishnievkin, when we decided to get a house. So moved in together, lived for a little bit and decided to get a house. It was, again, early in our relationship when neither she nor I knew about the mental blind spots called cognitive biases or didn't know much about them. So we decided to buy a house, and what I now realize was sort of a foolish impulse to follow that American dream of being homeowners and so on. So that's what we did. We spent a lot of time looking for good options and found one that was pretty reasonable. And we made a bid, we won the bid, we put down the earnest money of $1,500, and then we told our parents, they were not happy with us or the quality of our decision making. Neither her parents nor my parents were happy with us. And they made us sit down and actually think through the house buying decision pretty carefully. And we looked at the finances, really thinking about the finances. What they pointed out and what we really haven't thought about is that just making a down payment, which we had the money for, and the mortgage would not be nearly enough to cover the house costs, because there's also taxes, which had been covered by our rent, and also upkeep, so repair and so on. And I was really surprised how much that costs when my parents told me about how much that stuff costs. But again, our renting money used to cover that. And also all the utilities. Our utilities, the heat, the water used to be covered by our rent. So the cost we would pay was actually much more than Agnes and I anticipated. And we realized after we sat down and looked at all the costs, we just couldn't afford the house. And that pretty much sucked. We moaned and groaned for a while. We tried to figure out what to do. Can we afford it in any way? What do we do? But, we eventually realized that we're just going to have to break the contract and, they give away the earnest money. So they kept the earnest money, we lost the money. So that was $1,500 down the drain and, a lot of heartache, a lot of pain. I really wish we had the strategies for preventing failure and implementing decisions much earlier in our relationship, at that time in the relationship, because then, believe me, we would not have been going to buy the house. We would have just been pretty happy renting and would have found a nice place to rent and so on. So why do we make that mistake? The mistake comes from a series of dangerous judgment errors that come from how our minds are wired, come from our gut reactions, our intuitions, partially because of our evolutionary heritage and partially because just of our biology, just because of our wiring. These errors are called cognitive biases, and that's what I specialize in. I specialize in studying cognitive biases and helping folks address cognitive biases. And of course, I suffered from cognitive biases myself. One of the reasons I'm passionate about helping people avoid them is because I know how much they hurt on my own skin, like with that house. So I developed a technique called failure proofing. The technique that I developed, I specifically used it with my consulting and coaching clients, which is how I make my money, consulting and coaching for business leaders, training and speaking on addressing dangerous judgment errors and making the wisest and most profitable decisions. So I used this technique, and it was especially helpful after they make a decision and they want to implement it, particularly on major projects and critical processes, as I mentioned before. So I also find very useful myself when I have anything to do with my business. Obviously I run my own business. I'm the CEO of the Disaster Avoidance Experts small business, and also in my personal life when buying a house, buying a car, making a move, any sort of major activity in my personal life. So the technique failure proofing is based on cutting-edge research in cognitive neuroscience and behavioral economics in the field called debiasing. Now, scholars like myself use the term debiasing. It doesn't have anything to do with racism or anything like that. It has to do with fighting cognitive biases, getting rid of cognitive biases. That's why it's called debiasing. So what the research on this topic shows is that just knowing about cognitive biases, such as the cognitive biases that led me and Agnes to make the bad decision on the house purchase, doesn't really help us that much with addressing cognitive biases. It's surprising, but it's kind of like knowing that you should exercise. You know you should exercise. We should all exercise 30 minutes a day, every day, or at least 4 times a week, but ideally every day. But if we don't know specifically what exercises to do, it's going to be pretty hard for us to exercise. And the debiasing techniques are specific strategies that you can use to exercise your mind and gain mental fitness and effectively address the dangerous judgment errors called cognitive biases. Specifically, failure proofing applies to addressing cognitive biases when you implement your decisions, major decisions on significant projects and important processes. So let's dive into the technique without further ado. Failure proofing has 8 steps. Now, if you've been watching The Wise Decision Maker for a while, if you've been listening to it, you know pretty well by now that I like 8-step or 10-step or 5-question techniques. Why is that? I find that these are, I developed the techniques not for the wise decision maker, but for use with my coaching and consulting clients. And they find it very useful because it helps them know what steps to go through. It gives them a clear structure, clear guidance, and it helps them coordinate their teams on going through the same steps. When you're going together with a team for a series of steps, having everyone know all the steps is really helpful. And failure proofing can be done by yourself, but it's especially useful to be done with a team. So I'll go through how you do it with a team and the blog linked in the notes. It'll show you both how you can do it with a team and how you can do it by yourself. So deal? Deal. Okay. First step, you gather all the people who are relevant to making the decision, all the stakeholders. You don't want more than 10 people in the room. An ideal number is 6 people. You want people, if you have more stakeholders than that, you want people who represent key stakeholders, so just representatives of them. You want to make sure that the people in the room have a mixture of people with authority, so people at the top level of organization, and people with expertise, which are not necessarily at all people on the top level of the organization. It depends on the specific decision, process, project that needs to be assessed. So have a mixture of people with expertise and with authority. Now, you also want to get a facilitator from outside the team. So you don't want someone from inside the team who has a stake in the decision to actually be facilitating the decision-making process. So you can get somebody from outside the team, but inside the organization. You can get somebody from your advisory board. You can get a mentor from outside your organization. You can get a peer from outside your organization. You can get a consultant or a coach, and I often fulfill this role. So that is the kind of facilitator that you can get to help yourself ensure that you do the failure-proofing technique right. Another aspect of the failure-proofing technique that you want to make sure to get right is anonymity. I often get asked about this. Why are so many aspects of the failure-proofing technique anonymous? It's pretty simple, because in the failure-proofing technique, you're going to have to most likely voice some unpopular opinions, and if you want those unpopular opinions voiced, people are quite reluctant to voice unpopular opinions if they know they can get punished for them. So if somebody says the project will fail because the CEO doesn't have enough experience in implementing this sort of project, and the 2 times he tried to implement a certain project that failed, you don't want somebody voicing that. So, you want somebody voicing that, but you don't want to be the person voicing that. So that's why anonymity is so important as part of the process. So step 1. Now, step 2, you explain all the steps, all the 8 steps to people in the room so that they know what they're getting in for and how the next steps will go. Third step, you're getting to the first substantive aspect of failure proofing. What you do is you develop 2 next best alternatives, at least 2 next best alternatives to the current project, process, decision that you're evaluating. Now, how you're going to do this is you're going to have people who are part of the group anonymously write out at least 1 next best alternative, ideally 3 or more. So that's what you're going to do. Then you're going to have the facilitator gather the next best alternatives Go through them, eliminate the same ones and read them out loud. Then you have the team discuss them and vote on the two that seem most salient, most acceptable to the current project or process, whatever you're discussing. And then you discuss those in more depth, and then you anonymously vote on whether you want one of the next best alternatives to focus on that or on the current project, process, or decision. And most of the time, the large majority of the time, the current project or process wins. However, then you discuss whether you want to incorporate some elements of one or both of the next best alternatives into the structure of the project and process. And what you want to do when you discuss the next best alternatives, you want to make sure to get at least a couple of team members defending each next best alternative, with at least one of the team members having authority, so that it's not simply everyone is for the current project and process and against the next best alternative. So you have a thorough evaluation process. All right, next is a critical step 4, where you basically discuss the reasons for failure of the project. So how do you do this? Well, you imagine a world where the project completely failed, or the process, or whatever, completely failed. Really, 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 really failed. So why is that important? Because it gives you permission. It gives you permission, it gives all others permission to brainstorm the reasons for why it failed. Now, if people just say, why can this project fail? That is not nearly as effective as just saying it failed. Now, why did it fail? Because otherwise, if we just say, why might this fail? People who are supporters of a project will just have a defensive response, and their emotions will inhibit them from being creative and coming up with actual reasons for failure. And if you've been listening to The Wise Decision Maker for a while now, you know that emotions determine about 80 to 90% of what we do. How we think, how we behave. They are critically important. And they are the part of ourselves that we can least control. The only parts of ourselves, the only thing in the world that we can control are our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings. And that's the order in which we can control them. Our thoughts first, our behaviors next, and our feelings last and least. So you want to immediately, as part of the structure, give their feelings a break and tell them completely failed. Now come up with reasons for why it failed, anonymously. Anonymity is crucial here, especially critical, because this is a part where you get some unpopular, rude opinions, something that someone might interpret as rude, something having to do with somebody's personality. Or let's say, the project will fail because the marketing manager and the operations manager are at each other's throats and they really want to undermine each other more than they want the project to succeed. Yeah, I heard that. Yeah, I'm not telling you something that I haven't heard. That has happened. And then we had to discuss that and figure out what to do. And that's a story for another day. But anyway, so for this, you imagine all the reasons that it failed. Then the facilitator gathers what people wrote down and ensures anonymity. This is an especially crucial part, to ensure anonymity by the facilitator. So then the facilitator ensures anonymity and voices the common themes in why something failed. And then you discuss these themes as a team, as a group. You discuss why it failed, and then you move on to the next steps. You talk about the most likely reasons that it failed. So you look at all the failures and you assign them probabilities, 10%, 20%, 50%, 70%, 90%, whatever. And you also assign them impact. What is going to be the impact of this failure? So what is going to be the biggest impact failure? What are going to be some smaller aspects of, for example, if a supplier is late delivering a moderately important part, maybe you can figure out pretty quickly how to replace that part and it won't be so catastrophic. But if something happens like we don't have enough production to actually fulfill the orders for this, that's going to be much more serious because it takes a much longer time usually to ramp up production or to line up additional production. So you want to evaluate the seriousness of each reason for failure. You want to especially emphasize and put higher probability and impact on reasons that are seen as rude, problematic, unpopular, and so on, because we have an intuitive tendency to not look at these reasons and to ignore them and to, just sweep them under the rug. Keeping nice and comfortable, not having conflicts. Yeah, you don't want to do that in this case. So then you focus on fixing problems. That's the next step. Step 6. How can you fix these problems? Decide on several failure modes that you think are the most relevant, which means a combination of the most likely, of the most harmful, and most rude, politically problematic, challenging, controversial. And then you look at the solutions. You see how you can solve them. Brainstorm solutions. Everyone should brainstorm, discuss solutions, see which ones are the best possible solutions. At this stage, you evaluate any dangerous judgment errors that you might be facing, cognitive biases, like I mentioned. Now, which ones, I'm not going to go in depth into which ones because there will be a blog linked in the episode notes that discusses an assessment with the 30 most dangerous judgment errors in business, in the workplace. So you can take a look at that blog to learn about which are the most likely problems that you want to assess and address. So then you fixed problems. You go on to a perhaps more fun step for many people, which is step 7, maximizing success. It really is more fun. I like it more, but your taste may vary. Next, to maximize success, you kind of scrunch the previous 3 steps into one because you kind of know already how to do them, and I didn't want to do a 10-step thing. You first imagine that the project process succeeded spectacularly. It was wonderful. It went beyond your wildest expectations. Perhaps not wildest, but really beyond your expectations. Spectacular success. And then you anonymously write out all the reasons for the success. You have group members write out all the reasons, again anonymously, because some controversial issues might be brought up. The project leader was replaced by a more competent one. Heard that. So you come up with reasons for success, and then you discuss. Now, the facilitator gathers them, again, ensuring anonymity, highlights the key themes, and then you discuss the reasons for success, and you assign probabilities, and probabilities again, so likelihood of success due to this, and that, and the impact of success, highlighting especially the ones that are going to be controversial, rude, or politically problematic. And finally, you brainstorm ways that you can ensure the success. You focus on several things that are most likely, most relevant to lead to your success, and you brainstorm reasons. You brainstorm not reasons, you brainstorm strategies, techniques, steps that can lead to the success. And again, you check for cognitive biases when you come up with these solutions. Finally, after you do all that, you go to the last step. Step 8, we're at the conclusion now. So what you do is you revise the project, or the project leader, or the process leader, whoever has ownership of the decision, revises the project plan, the process plan, the decision implementation to ensure that all of the elements from next best alternatives, from the imagining failure and solving it, from the imagining success and ensuring it, go into the final plan. And that's how you prevent project and process disasters, and that's how you gain outstanding success. All right, so that has been the failure proofing technique. Check out the blog on failure proofing, which is linked in the notes. So is the blog on the assessment on the 30 most dangerous judgment errors in the workplace. Now, as always, my goal is to provide you with awesome value on avoiding decision disasters, making the best decisions, avoiding cognitive biases, defeating them, and in general, being awesome in how you create, make, and implement your decisions. I hope I've achieved that. So I want to hear from you. Comment, please, in the comments on how you think the failure proofing technique might be helpful for you. If you like this video, if you like this episode, please click like on the episode, and please subscribe to The Wise Decision Maker to make sure that you don't miss any content on making wise decisions and avoiding dangerous judgment errors. And of course, follow us on social media, to help yourself get a whole variety of content and engage with me and other members of disaster avoidance experts on addressing dangerous judgment errors and making the wise decisions. Now, You can learn much more about these topics in my book on addressing dangerous judgment errors and making the best decisions. It's called Never Go With Your Gut: How Pioneering Leaders Make the Best Decisions and Avoid Business Disasters. And you can subscribe to my free course on this topic, the Wise Decision Maker course. And again, that will be linked in the show notes. So I hope to see you on the next episode of The Wise Decision Maker, and I'm wishing you the wisest decisions, my friends.